Well, good morning and welcome to Hudson Institute. I'm Ken Weinstein. I serve as Japan Chair here at Hudson. And I want to welcome our audience here at the Betsy and Walter Stern Policy Center in Washington. I also want to welcome our audience online and our audience, our home audience through C-SPAN. Now, on the eve of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's historic state visit to the United States on April 10th, it seemed like an appropriate moment to examine the benefits of the deep and expanding U.S. and Japan economic relationship. And as all of us in this room have seen on the news reports, including by certain members of our audience here today in the press, about the impressive deliverables that are going to be coming out of both the U.S.-Japan summit on the 10th and the U.S.-Japan-Philippines trilateral summit on the 11th, most of the focus on the discussions will be on security issues, not economic ones. And that being said, although they are increasingly intertwined at these days when economic security has become so critical to the United States, Japan, and increasingly to the Philippines as well. And that being said, and the Japanese, as we all know, are too polite to say this, there is unhappiness in Japan over President Biden's decision to publicly oppose the sale of U.S. steel to Nippon Steel. And so we thought in a propitious moment to focus on the importance of U.S.-Japan cooperation on economic security, on reliable supply chains, on Japan's significant and longstanding foreign direct investment across the United States, and the potential benefits that an enriched U.S.-Japan partnership offers to American workers and allied technological leadership. Now, all these themes except the Nippon Steel deal, of course, are going to be on the agenda at the White House next week. We have two superb panels of experts today, one on economic security that I'm going to moderate, and another on foreign direct investments that my Japan Chair colleague, Dr. Will Chu, will moderate. But first, we have the honor of a keynote and a discussion with Governor Eric Holcomb of Indiana. Now, Governor Holcomb, who is finishing his second and final term as governor, has a track record of balanced budgets, infrastructure improvements, and low unemployment that are the envy of governors across the country. Not only was he reelected in 2020 with the most votes in Indiana history, he is focused on economic development and has turned Indiana, as Forbes declared, the best state to start a business. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, 45 companies committed to locate or expand in Indiana, investing over $20 billion in operations, creating over 5,000 new jobs. I just had breakfast this morning with Korean Ambassador Cho, who was just out in Indiana with the governor, and for an important announcement by SK Hynix on a big investment in Indiana. And Indiana as well has more, and he sends his best to you, Governor. Indiana has more Japanese investment per capita than any other state, with more than 300 Japanese-owned businesses employing over 55,000 Hoosiers. And the governor had rearranged his schedule originally to be with us here today, but unfortunately, Matt Painter, Zach Eddy, Braden Smith, and their Boilermaker teammates had a better idea: to qualify Purdue for the Final Four for the first time since 1980. And I can say this as a one-time Hoosier: in Indiana, nothing tops basketball, not even Japanese investment, not even the Indianapolis 500. So the governor finds himself happily in Arizona. We thank you for being with us, and it's my honor and pleasure to turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you so much, Governor.
Well, good morning, and thank you all, especially for the invitation to speak with you on a topic that's very important and matters a lot to me and our citizens, Hoosiers, as you just mentioned. It matters to us professionally and personally, and quite frankly, patriotically. This, two-way trade relationships with our allies around the world are nothing short of what I would describe as just one, but a major one of our American superpowers, if you will. And that applies just as much at the state level as it does at the national level, as I'm here to hopefully try to convey as the governor of one of those states, the great state of Indiana. And it's always a pleasure to bring a little bit of our Hoosier heartland spirit, where we actually get stuff done and try to export that to Washington, D.C. itself. And now for those of you in the audience who may not be, there's probably very few, but may not be steeped in Hudson Institute lore, allow me to share a few things that may surprise you. First, Ken, who has just mentioned, the Hudson Institute has these ties to Indiana, was obviously home to Indiana for 2 decades, from 1984 to 2004. So just 4 years after the Boilers made it to that Final Four. And in fact, Ken first joined Hudson when it was based in Indianapolis. Even lived there for a while, and by all accounts, he liked it. So forgive me for blowing the cover of an influential Washingtonian. But one of my mentors and predecessors as an Indiana governor, Mitch Daniels, he was also the president of Hudson during some of that time, and the Institute helped to inspire a spirit of policy entrepreneurship and education and healthcare and workforce development and much, much more. And that thread or that theme continues to this very day and has been instructive. And I have the joy of working to sustain that very spirit that was first started and can be traced to Hudson's contributions here on Hoosier soil. So you see, in Indiana to this very day, we pride ourselves on being an incubator for innovative ideas and problem solving, not just approaches, but commitments with that special Hoosier touch. And it's by now become part of our culture, and it's who we are proud to identify with as problem solvers, people who get things done. And, Ken, here's a thought. Hudson spent its first 2 decades in New York, and then it's next to in Indiana. And now Hudson has been in D.C. for 2 decades. So I'm thinking cyclically here. It's time for another move, and it's time to come back to the promised land of Indiana, and we'll treat you right, and we'll embrace and promote the values and principles Hudson holds so dear. And I think we're just the 2 guys that can make that move happen. So forgive me, but I hope I've at least right there demonstrated I'm always hustling for Indiana, which brings me to another surprising fact about Hudson Institute. And in light of our topic here today, believe it or not, Japan was not always recognized as an economic powerhouse and a major global player. Sometimes we just take that for granted in today's world, but one American thinker saw it coming, and his name was, as you know, Herman Kahn, the founder of the Hudson Institute. And in 1970, he, of course, published that book called The Emerging Japanese Super State. And the book was a work on futurism. And like most futurism, Kahn's book didn't maybe get every detail exactly right. Who could have? But he got the big picture spot on. And namely that Japan would grow and prosper through its work ethic, its growth strategy and strategies, and its economic connections to the rest of the world. And the book was, again, of course, a smash hit in Japan, inspiring confidence in a nation that was still just, keep it in context, just 25 years beyond that wartime devastation. And the book, fortunately, also inspired this institute to keep its eye on Japan, which of course it's done to this day. And rest assured that I too keep my eyes fixed on and my travel itineraries focused on Japan as well, for many of the very same reasons. There is a strange, to me, counterproductive notion in some political circles today, maybe more pronounced, that governors should not travel overseas because that somehow means you're taking your eye off the ball or not paying enough attention at home or to your home state's benefit. And my, reaction to that is, huh? I don't get it. Traveling abroad is, of course, one of the best ways I know to help my state. And I think when you do the math, it becomes pretty obvious why. It's how we bring Indiana's success story to the world, and how we seek out true partners who want to grow together on both sides of the pond, whichever it may be. And so over the last 7 years, just to demonstrate I practice what I preach, I've had the privilege of leading 13 now, there'll be more international trips covering 22 different countries, many of them more than once, and one of those countries 3 times. And that country would be, surprise, surprise, Japan. A bond that I and my predecessors have really come to treasure and cherish. Japan could not be more critical or paramount to our success story. And so the Indiana-Japan relationship is one that my fellow Hoosiers and I take tremendous pride in. Its impact is woven into our economy, our education, our communities, deep-rooted small business supply chain, deliveries to the big tier 1, tier 2, tier 3s, and really has just become part of our everyday life in so many different ways. And if you just rewind the tape, we've come far fast, to nearly go back 40 years ago, to use just one kind of milestone or one point, when a small then but rising Japanese company took a chance on Indiana. It was 1986, and Subaru had just made big news here in Indiana and in America, and committed to locating its first U.S. manufacturing plant. In fact, its first manufacturing plant outside of Japan, in Lafayette, Indiana. And that's when I would say, and just looking back, the Indiana-Japan relationship began to really again take root. And then, as we see today, annually bloom in ways that we couldn't have envisioned 40 some years ago. And since then, they've invested hundreds of millions, billions really, but hundreds of millions of dollars in resources into its Indiana facility, expanding again and again and again, developing new talent and giving back to its community. And the same could be said for Honda and Toyota. I remember when I moved down near Princeton, Indiana, when Toyota first moved into what was then a field and built their first plant. And that was about an $800 million capital investment at the time. I was just down for another expansion at Toyota not too long ago, and they mentioned that they have now invested $6.6 billion. So from that initial euphoria and excitement of $800 million back in, that was around 1997, to today, almost knocking on $7 billion in investment, is just quite amazing, and just shows you how people around the world have so many options and where to invest and reinvest and grow, and they're doubling down, so to speak, on their commitment to Indiana and us to them. And with each new announcement, each new groundbreaking, each new ribbon cutting, each new car that rolls off the line, Indiana and Japan have invested outside of the plant or factory campus, so to speak. And we've invested in each other in so many different special ways in our partnership. But we've really kind of grown up together and growing stronger together as a result. And our mutual success is, as I just alluded to, has come in waves. We're now the home to over 300 Japanese companies. Of our total, we have, it goes up every day, but last time I checked, about 1,050 international companies, and of those 300 are Japanese companies alone, and they support about 55,000 high quality careers, not just jobs, but careers for Hoosiers, and that stability that comes along with it in a community. And we likewise have Indiana headquartered companies operating in Japan, of course, like Eli Lilly and Company, and Cook Medical, and Cummins, and Herschel Laboratories, and Zimmer Biomet, and that list goes on and on and on and on as well. But just to name a few that you're, of course, familiar with, and they're helping that collaboration. They're helping drive the innovation and job creation on both sides of the Pacific. And as a matter of fact, right here, in the heart of the heartland, Indiana has the largest amount of Japanese investment per capita of any state. And so that's a source of real personal pride. But as I just mentioned, the supply chains that come along with leading OEMs like Toyota and Honda and Subaru, that starts to really become obvious why we've been able to obtain that ranking, and not only obtain it, but hold on to it and grow it. They're not only helping us drive our economy and us theirs and our manufacturing sector forward, but their leadership in the mobility industry really does put us on the front lines of cutting edge advancements much more broadly. And I always think about it was mentioned that we value basketball more than racing, but I always think about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway back in 1909 was created as a test track, not as a race track, but as a test track for engines. And now you see, obviously over 100 years later, a century later, we're still testing technology at that track. And you have, by the way, Takuma Sato, who was the first Japanese driver to win the Indy 500, and he didn't only win it once, but he won it twice. So whenever we get together for the race, that invitation still stands, Ken. It's fascinating to not just be pulled into the thrill of the competition, but it's fascinating to see all the testing that is going on and all the innovation that is occurring that maybe doesn't look so obvious to every fan that's there. But ladies and gentlemen, I would just say, as Indiana looks into the future, by investing in those innovations, by investing in initiatives that attract electric vehicle production and battery plants, battery recyclers, the whole ecosystem, we're ensuring that our two regions remain the world's leaders in that very future of mobility. where both R&D and production intersect and then launch into the market. Because the bottom line is our industries are only as strong as our two-way trade framework holds up, and that calls in the necessity for trust and experience, being there for a friend in need is a friend indeed, and you have to back that up time and time again in the good times and in the challenging times as well. And that means up and down the supply chains, both importing and exporting, as the chains themselves face the stress and strain, not only in terms of the just-in-time delivery, but also ensure the just-in-case delivery can be met due to unforeseen threats or interruptions. Barge knocks out a bridge in Baltimore's port, or the Houthis send drones at ships in the Red Sea, or Putin invades Ukraine, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on and on, but our ecosystem or our different sectors and the supply chains that go with it have to be able to respond to those occurrences and those shocks to the system, which is one thing that I'm proud of and one thing that makes Indiana stick out. I can assure you, to and from Indiana, our supply chains are just that, they're strong, and they continue to adapt and mature to make sure that we can continue to be strong. And imports like computer and electronic components and machinery and metal products all help support industries like those that are booming, and our semiconductor production and life science innovation investments that are growing in this state of certainty, this state of stability and predictability, and in a place that I think offers a lot of continuity. Again, I go back to my predecessors and the trajectory of trade and capital investment is almost like a hockey stick now. That momentum, that earned momentum, is a real positive force for good and progress, and we're benefiting from that continuity right now. And indeed, this two-way trade is happening on a competitive national scale. In 2022, a couple years ago, the United States as a whole exported over $80 billion worth of goods to Japan, while importing $148 billion from Japan. And we could not be more humbled by the faith and trust these Japanese companies have placed in Indiana, which accounts for a disproportional $2 billion share of those U.S. exports. So we may be geographically a small state, but we are packing a powerful punch when it comes to the bottom line. And I'm just as proud of the fact that Indiana's relationship with Japan extends far beyond the business investment and career creation communities. The influence contributions of our shared friendship can be seen in our governance, in our policy making, in, again, as I said, our educational system, all the way from K through 12 STEM support to critical college and university partnerships and record student enrollments, and I mean Asian enrollments at Purdue, at Indiana University, at Notre Dame, at Rose-Hulman. We have 30 privates and of course publics, and we're seeing those enrollments continue to tick up to get a world-class education. And then our goal is to make sure that we're sticky and they stay in Indiana. And you can see it not just in our school settings, but in our decades-long people-to-people relationships, or our sister state relationship with Tochigi Prefecture, in our 13 now sister city relationships that Indiana communities all over our state really do hold dear, that are built into their community cultures. You can see it in our global partnerships with the Japanese government, Aichi Prefecture and Gunma Prefecture, and you can see it, of course, in our 5 Japanese language Saturday schools, and in the continuous educational exchanges between Indiana and, again, Japanese universities. You can see it throughout the communities where Japanese investments took hold, and in our co-commitment to advancing quality of life and quality of place initiatives. And the opportunity for our residents, Toyota, for example, has invested millions of dollars back into Hoosier communities in their region that are funding youth development initiatives in Southern Indiana, down in Gibson County, Princeton, Indiana. That's just one example, like at the YMCA, and coming together in terms of place-making initiatives, housing, et cetera, to be part of, again, the collaboration and the partnership to improve and raise up that quality of life for their teammates, but also for people who don't work at Toyota, as an example. And you can also, of course, see it in our commitment from a state perspective, from our Indiana Economic Development Corporation's perspective. We have a branch office in Japan for the last 40 years, and it's busier today than ever, which is obviously no surprise, as you've picked up. We're on a roll here, and there's a lot of momentum. So it's natural that our long, close friend is helping drive that good and busy schedule. And you can see it because we've created such a solid foundation for these relationships over that last 40 years. Just as solid, as I might add, is that limestone bedrock Indiana is known for, that helped build much of DC, including the Pentagon. And we'll continue to build on that foundation for the next 40 years and beyond. I'm quite confident that the ties Indiana and Japan share are strong and storied. And I believe they're working, again, better than ever, because we're working together. And it's kind of Exhibit A on how to get things done. And this is so important, and it's not taken for granted for 1 nanosecond. And I would just say that's at a premium. We live in these very unsettled times globally, and I think that unsettled is the right word, by the way, because these are still good times in many ways, even though we see these threats around us at home and in other parts of the world. And here's where I part company with many others in American elective or public life today. I do not believe that these unsettled times and rising threats will push the United States into economic isolationism. We simply can't allow that. Of course, we can't afford that to happen. And again, Indiana is Exhibit A on the alternative. It works. And earlier, I alluded to the fact that this robust two-way trade, this robust investment, and our relationships with our allies serve as one of our American superpowers. And my childhood recollection suggests that superheroes don't give up their superpowers when they need them the most, and neither should the United States. And as push starts coming to shove in tough neighborhoods around the world, this will become more and more important to have these exhibit A's, if you will, like Indiana, out in the open and obvious as the other way to counter short-term and long-term benefits. And you should know Indiana, before me, on my watch, and I'm sure after me, we're not gonna give into that. We're not gonna give that up. On that much, I can assure you. The facts just speak for themselves and back me up as to why. And I'll just say quickly that since 2017, kind of my frame of reference, when I raised my hand and took the oath to serve, our Indiana GDP has grown by over $150 billion. Our private sector employment is up 200,000 to an all-time high level. While our unemployment, we just got some unemployment numbers out today from the feds, but our state unemployment rolls remain at a historic low, lower than the national average, which ticked up to 3.8%, I think I saw earlier this morning. Last year, we brought in, through the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, over $28 billion in capital investment to Indiana, which was an all-time record. And again, to put this in context, 3 years ago, our all-time record was $8.7 billion. And a year later, or 2 years ago, we were at $22 billion. And last year, we were $28 billion. So from 8.7 to 28 billion in a matter of a couple years speaks for itself. And of that 28 billion, 20 billion, just over 70%, was foreign direct investment. So I always say to those who question or criticize, do you really want to leave that 70% on the table? Did you only want to do 8 billion? In a year of capital investment that, of course, doesn't just lead to GDP. Most importantly, it leads to careers and new opportunities in the very future economy that we want to be a part of. And that, of course, means more homes, and that, of course, ownership, and that means more kids in school, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Building population density, talent density. So it's not just the CapEx, but it's what it leads to that contributes to the health and vibrancy of our state. And do I believe that global trade and inbound investment from abroad had something to do with this? Obviously, 70% speaks for itself. So that's what I, counter to these critics who may say my time could be spent better here at home. It is being spent here at home. And we have to work 24/7. It's a small world, made smaller and smaller by technology every day. And again, Japan trade and investment, you better bet, plays a huge role in our state's health. So please, in closing, consider Indiana as Exhibit A in the case against economic isolationism, the mutual attraction of open, innovation-driven, market-oriented societies is powerful for the simple reason that 1 + 1 between such societies equals much more than 2. We're stronger together, as you say, as in e pluribus unum. There truly is, out of many markets, one stronger one. And this is true across the Atlantic. It's true across the Pacific. It's evident between the US and Australia, India, South Korea, Taiwan, And of course, Japan proves it every day in every way. People to people, government to government, business to business, whether the state of Indiana is directly involved or not. Japan represents a brighter future for Indiana, more stable, more certain, more predictable. And the markets like that. And they'll like more of it if we're, as a nation, as states, prepared to seize more of it between the US and more countries in Africa and Latin America as well. To put it mildly, these sorts of mutually beneficial relationships are not in the cards for our geostrategic adversaries, the likes of Iran and North Korea and Russia. Their systems don't work that way. So thank you for maintaining our superpowers through the valuable work that you all do and offer guys like me. We're paying attention, and your willingness to facilitate and discuss the on-ground benefits of investment and trade is cause for my optimism in and of itself. So again, thank you for doing more than your part in keeping America's bond with Japan unbreakable. And now, Ken, I look forward to ducking or dodging any of your tough questions that
Well, Governor,
may have piled up. Or they're up.
Governor, let me just say, Governor, those remarks really were extraordinary. I mean, I do consider myself a Hoosier. It's kind of where I stopped being a student and became an adult. And I see Tom Donahue in the audience, the former head of the Chamber of Commerce, was on the Hudson board in those years, and Tom Duesterberg, who grew up in Vincennes, who was top A, was chief of staff to Dan Quayle, and obviously consider, as you noted, Mitch Daniels, Mike Pence, who was just here the other night. You have some extraordinary predecessors, and I see that their seat is also being held by an extraordinary individual, in case anybody doubted that. Those remarks were truly enlightening. Let me throw two questions out to you, and then we'll open up to a couple from the audience. First, one of the things that really interested me was your talk about talent density. You talk about careers and talent density, and particularly in the mobility sector, but elsewhere. And that clearly is a factor in both Japanese investment into Indiana. It's a factor in other foreign direct investment into Indiana. And it's frankly something, as you know, it's really been a transformation in Indiana, transformation of the educational system, as well. And how critical has this foreign direct investment made the talent density possible? You're on mute here. Is it?
The most important factors when businesses are making a decision where to go and grow. And so I would say one is because companies, maybe before they even sit down with us, they've done their homework. They're like someone looking for a house or a realtor that's out there looking in a neighborhood, and before they even call the owner, they know what the taxes are. They know. So companies usually today, and this has changed somewhat over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, companies already know what the tax and regulatory environment or climate is. So if you're getting further looks, they know, but how much it will cost them is certainly a factor. So do you offer great sites to go and to grow at? We offer obviously a low cost environment, so we check that box. But the access to high talent, so low cost, high talent, is really the relationship of what allows an investment to become a forever or at least a long-term investment, that one that can endure the transitions. or transformations. And so when you look at the auto sector, we have 5 auto OEMs. I mentioned 3. We also have Stellantis, another foreign investor, and we have General Motors in different parts of our state. So a very competitive auto industry in our state with that very entrenched, elaborate supply chain that goes with it. Now, as we look at, I believe, the market needing to drive the scale and scope, speed of the auto industry transition, we're seeing major investment close to those plants, be it if they go EV or hybrid, fill in the blank, what their preference is. And the ability to have talent pipelines directly in from PhD to GED, by the way. And so if you're talking about semiconductors, which we just had at speaking, it's been a good week at Purdue, by the way. We just had an announcement a couple days ago of 3.9, almost 4 billion from SK Hynix in advanced packaging chips manufacturing up at West Lafayette. And so as semiconductors, as battery production is needed, we're seeing those investments come. But what's important to get it, and I'll land this plane, Ken. What's important is these auto manufacturing plants are not the auto plants of my grandfather, and it's time, and it's much easier to attract and to keep PhDs or college graduates coming out of Rolls-Royce or Purdue or IU or Notre Dame, you name it. I went to Hanover, another small school, as did Mike Pence. It's easier to keep those graduates if they're working on something that is future looking, like Herman Kahn talked about, and not in that what you may envision 40 years ago, this auto plant. So when you go to Kokomo, Indiana, we've got about $6 billion coming in from South Korea, Samsung SDI, to make batteries. And I asked them about what keeps them up at night, what are the hurdles, what barriers do I need to bust so they can scale up faster. Was workforce a concern? And they were excited, I would say, and optimistic and heartened by the fact that they're developing these direct pipelines with our universities to work on things that will determine the future. So I think a low-cost environment, rational regulatory climate, and talent really go a long way for us to seal the deal, so to speak.
And that was critical in the SD Hynix deal, as you mentioned, with Purdue, as the Korean ambassador mentioned this morning at our breakfast. Let me shift gears a little bit. Indiana is home to several thousand employees of U.S. Steel up in Gary, and just want to get your sense on Nippon Steel's offer for U.S. Steel. How you feel about it?
Well, I come from a state that is the #1 steel manufacturer in America, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of when we think about our different sectors that really move our state's economy. Obviously, manufacturing is #1. We're the #1 manufacturing state per capita in America. Proud of it. Advanced manufacturing increasingly so. Life sciences, as I mentioned briefly earlier, our hospitality industry continues to grow. IT and construction. And so when you think about timber and our contribution, when you think about limestone, as I mentioned, when you think about steel, these are industries that are going through transitions as well, both internally and due to external forces. And I have always said, and we've got domestic and international steel production going on in the state of Indiana right now, and I embrace it. And my bottom line is, I want those steel manufacturers to be able to continue to supply this product to all of our growth and building, but to the rest of the world as well. And so I hope I've been very over the top and clear about how we embrace Japan as an ally, and I want that production to continue. And so that company has been good for our country for a long, long time, and we just anticipate growing. And so I'm here as a governor, to say that plan, I want it to grow, and I want it to prosper, and I want Hoosiers to continue to go work there. And I don't want it to, because of other decisions, move somewhere else or be shuttered or see layoffs. So very appreciative of everything that's gone into saving that company.
Thank you, Governor. Let's open up. We got time for two. Let's try to make them short questions, since we were holding the governor beyond where he should be. And yeah. And please identify yourself if you're with the press, please.
Hello, sir. My name is Justin Marie. I'm a professional staff member with the House Committee on Natural Resources. As a former Hoosier myself, I know it's not hard to see Indiana's deep relationship with Japan. You know, whether you're in Fort Wayne or in Bloomington, you know, you see a lot of Japanese companies. But the thing is, in Washington, it's not as readily apparent, or this relationship is not as readily apparent, and it's rarely taken into account when crafting policy. Do you have any recommendations on how Congress and the executive can better support state initiatives? And yeah.
Great question. Governor?
Well, I have a long list of recommendations in Washington, but I'm not going to go to that list. My recommendations would be to, and this sounds rhetorical, but it's not harder than this, is to empower states to better control their own destinies, as our country, I believe, was structurally founded. It's not to say that Congress and our federal partners should just completely stay out of our business. I'm not suggesting that, but where we get slowed down, especially in this time of innovation, where Japan has excelled, where America has excelled, where you're starting to see the Silicon heartland, not just the Valley or Austin or Boston, really create life improving and life saving medicines, as an example. What we need is the federal government to have a sense of urgency about them, to no longer accept that voting yes or no is the job. The result is the job, and effort equals results in so many ways. And what we need are efforts that are going to embrace the sense of urgency, whether it comes to addressing issues of our national security that have a downstream effect on every state, or our economic security, to which I think that you were speaking to, allowing states where the rubber really meets the road to compete with one another. I love competing with other governors. And I love the fact that I came into this job working for one of my predecessors, Mitch Daniels, who I mentioned. And I'm proud of where we were in 2005 when he raised his right hand. And I'm just as proud today that the decisions that were made, maybe the medicine didn't taste good going down, but it did make it, we did get better. And I think Washington needs to focus on those things that will allow these state laboratories, these entrepreneurs of innovation, where it's really occurring, assist where they can. Big kudos to passing the CHIPS Act that had a profound, I think, positive impact on not just West Lafayette, but America, and therefore then our allies. And so every which way the federal government and Congress can remove barriers, have a sense of urgency about them when it comes to probably three things. One, and they're three I's. One is the illegal side of immigration, inflation, and insolvency of our federal government. And so I would say, hey, how about focusing on your core missions and then removing the barriers for the states? And if I think there would be broad consensus with the states that truly want to compete, Republican or Democrat, if someone would step forward and say, this is the plan. We're going to focus on it. We're going to get it right, and we're going to let the not just the risk takers, but the ones that are balancing their books and hustling, trying to grow their states, take the lead.
Great. We have time for one last question. Let me turn to you, Governor. I know you're going to be having this international trade fair right before the 500. And you want to say a little bit about that, and then great.
Yeah, we 2 years ago we decided that we wanted to invite. I wake up every day and I always say I want to take Indiana to the world, and I want to bring the world back to Indiana. It's a small world, and we're reliant on one another. We're going to grow, and we're going to get there faster together. And so we said, why doesn't a state like Indiana, in the heartland, where applied knowledge is really put to use, where these discoveries are being made, have been, by the way, like I mentioned, in 1909, before the Indianapolis Motor Speedway became a racetrack, where all these innovations are happening, whether it be on the family farm or the factory floor. Why don't we have nations, government to government, again, business to business, and some cultural people to people exchanges occur on a 2-day period where we talk about the future of energy, where we talk about the future of nutrition, where we talk about the future of manufacturing, where we talk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where the markets will pay attention to what is shared, because the CEOs, Eric Schmidt spoke a couple years ago regarding AI and its effect in Indianapolis, and how it would, and the role it would have in manufacturing. And so we have very high level speakers for a 2-day period, panels, speakers that have to do with this year's theme is under the umbrella of innovation, broadly speaking. But we'll have 33 as of last count, that's yesterday's count, 33 different nations, ambassadors, CEOs, about 700 people in those delegations, 700-800 people. Try to keep it tight, quality over quantity, although 700-800 people is a large amount of people. But really the decision makers globally. And so it's not a mini Davos. This is all about applied knowledge and what's next. And so we'll do that on the 23rd and 24th of May. And then we'll have, that's a Wednesday, Thursday, and then a Friday. It's a kind of more of a fun day. more networking, scheduled networking, deals can be done. That was one of the biggest joys, was watching folks who had not met one another, maybe a CEO from the Netherlands meeting a CEO from Spain, get together, and the good that comes from that. And then, of course, Sunday, the 26th, is the biggest sporting event on planet Earth every single year, the Indy 500. And we've had, that is truly an international gathering. So I kind of buried the lead, but it's a lot of fun on that Sunday to say that you're working in Indiana.
Well, there's no greater feeling in the world than being at the 500 and hearing back home in Indiana. And just really want to thank you, Governor. The remarks were extraordinary. I know the people of Indiana are going to miss you when your term ends. I know you're going to continue to make contributions both in public and private life to the benefit of Hoosiers and the rest of the country. And it's just really been an honor to have you keynote. You've set a very high bar for the rest of our discussions today. And go Boilermakers.
Boilers, boiler up, hammer down. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, boiler up, hammer down. Thank you, Governor. It's really been an honor. And let me ask the panelists to join us now for the first panel. Thank you so much. Those really were extraordinary remarks by Governor Holcomb, and actually, it would have been very nice to have him here. But when I was looking at the podium, he is 6'7". I am not sure that we might have had to put the podium on the ground. So now we're going to have a discussion on economic security, as I noted, and we have three very distinguished speakers with us today. And we're first going to hear from Tokyo, from Kazumi Nishikawa. Nishikawa-san is the Principal Director of for Economic Security Policy at the Ministry, in the Minister's Secretariat at the Ministry of Economics, Trade, and Industry. He has had a 3-decade long career in public service at METI, running the Commerce and Information Policy Bureau. He was the director of the IT Industry Division, where he covered semiconductor and digital strategy, ran healthcare, trade strategy, policy planning. He also worked in the Defense Ministry, in the Defense Policy Division, and in the Cabinet Office on the guidelines for U.S. defense cooperation. And this is sort of a sign of the growing importance of economic security in hard security that he now holds this post. He is a graduate of the School of Law of the University of Tokyo, which produces many noted Japanese public servants. He holds an LLM from both Northwestern and Georgetown University Law School. And so it is my pleasure to turn it over to you, my honor to turn it over to you, Nishikawa-san. Thank you for joining us at this very late hour.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Please allow me to explain the 7 minutes or some things. And first of all, I really appreciate you giving me the very precious opportunity to explain what is going on about the economic security in Japan and how important U.S.-Japan cooperation to implement economic securities. The uh, the definition of the economic security differs country by country and time to time. My American friend kindly told me that 100 years ago, President Roosevelt used the economic security by meaning to save the economy. 30 years ago, the President Clinton used the economic security to mean free trade or the WTOs, to do the safe business all over the world. But these days, especially in Japan, and maybe I think in the US as well, we are trying to do the third economic security as national security. Unfortunately, destabilizing the world, we have to defend our supply chain, technological basis, infrastructure from geopolitical, geoeconomical threat. In other words, we have to maintain our technological superiority, indispensability, as well as we have to maintain the self-reliance or the supply chain autonomy in this world. Please see the next page. In order to, could you change the slide to the next one? Yeah, in order to that, what the METI, GOJ, and the Kishida administration have done in last 3 or 4 years is the first, we include trade, economy, and the technology as a very important pillar of national security strategies. The end of the 2022, we changed national security strategy first in last 9 years to include economy and trade in the very important, the economy and technology as a very important pillar of the national security strategies. And since last year, we are in the implementation phase of the economic security. Roughly 2 things. One is then to advance or keep our technological superiority, especially not only the defense or the aerospace related, the traditional regarded, the national security related things, but also the computing, clean tech, biotech. These 3 technologies are really, really essential. Next generation computing, quantum, AI, or the advanced semiconductor, next generation clean tech, biomanufacturing. These things are very essential national security issues right now. So therefore, Japan, together with allies and the like-minded countries, is very keen to run faster in these areas. Simultaneously, we have to defend our supply chain or the autonomy against so-called over-dependency structure or the over-dependency strategies, which means that these days, some, the supply chain or the essential goods like the critical minerals are dominated by some countries, some regions, some companies. And such kind of over-dependency structure tend to be used as the weaponization tools or the economic coercion tools. For example, currently, let's say the gallium or the germanium or the graphite, these kind of critical minerals is very essential to create from iPhone to the fighter jets. But these critical minerals are very difficult for us to grasp or to acquire. So because of the over-dependency structures, so we have to diversify the procurement in order to avoid over-dependency structures. Anyway, whether it is then to advance our technological leaderships or to diversify our procurement to maintain the self-reliance, we need Japan-US corporations. Think about the semiconductor things. Since for last 3 years, the establishment of the Kishida administrations, the Japan has invested a lot to the semiconductor with the cooperation with United States. 2 years ago, my minister and us were in New York, Albany, and Washington, D.C. to agree the basic principle for semiconductor cooperation. 30 years ago, that Japan had trade war with United States about the semiconductor. But this time, the Japan and US shake hands tightly to strengthen our joint capability of semiconductor technological leadership as well as semiconductor resilient supply chain. The destination of the Albany 20 years ago, Japanese companies, Tokyo Electron, and US companies like IBM or the AMAT or the other companies jointly created semiconductor innovation hub in New York, Albany. At that time, I got reported. Nothing was there for the semiconductor. But after the 9/11, the two countries established new innovation things. Since last 20 years, lots of innovation came from the Albany as for the semiconductor. Then currently IBM and Japanese venture called Rapidus jointly trying to create a new type of semiconductor, cutting edge semiconductor companies together using the 20 years innovation as an engine. So by doing that, we have done a lot together to advance technological leaderships for next generation computing. Currently, Japan only cannot achieve the technological leadership as well as self-reliance of the supply chain. Japan, US, Korea, Taiwan, European Unions, a lot of countries and regions, especially the allies and like-minded countries, should do together to provide the future national security assurance. Maybe I had a better pause here, but finally, I'd like to only one thing, that in order to implement economic security, we need strategic collaboration between government and industries, because then the player or the asset of the defense of the economic security is owned by businesses or the industries. So therefore, the METI, together with the National Security Secretariat of Japan and other related ministries, are very keen to invest to implement economic security together with industries, together with allies and like-minded countries. And most important country is United States. Maybe I had a better pause here, and thank you for listening. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Nishikawa-san, for opening our discussion with those enlightening remarks. And we will, I think we'll have, each of us will present. And, well, perhaps, why don't I start first? Let's say everyone present, and then I'll direct questions individually at each of you. So our next speaker is going to be David Rader, and David Rader is Senior Advisor in the Office of the Secretary of Defense in a capacity in which he works on economic security, statecraft, warfare issues across the Defense Innovation Unit, the Office of Strategic Counsel, and DARPA. He previously was Deputy Director of Global Investments and Economic Security at DoD, focusing on national economic security, foreign direct investment, trade, and industrial policies, and other issues under the purview of CFIUS. He's had though he's a young man, he's had a very distinguished career already in serving in the U.S. Army, working in the private sector at the RAND Corporation, at J.P. Morgan and Ernst & Young. He holds more graduate degrees then, geez, then I can't think of anybody who's had more degrees than you do, and you're currently completing one in international relations from Cambridge, I assume a doctorate. And we're also pleased to announce that you just became a father again on Tuesday, and we are especially grateful to your wife.
Yes.
A round of applause
Yeah,
for
yeah.
allowing you to be here. That's a rare dispensation. It shows your dedication to the topic of economic security. So
That's right. Yeah, and especially my wife, who is tremendous, truly. She's not watching this, so those are genuine comments. I'm not trying to win favor.
but they will be on C-SPAN for your child to watch.
That's right.
10th birthday, 18th birthday, 21st birthday, and otherwise.
That's right. So, yeah, I mean, so my comments will be kind of short to say the department, and specifically the United States, is entering a new relationship with its understanding of the relationship between capital and national security as we really get serious about economic security. And there's a few layers there, of course. You have supply chain security, you have critical materials, minerals, rare earths, however you want to bucket that together. And then you have just general economic wellness, how well the markets are performing, access to capital, our ability to have enough capital coming in to pay for aircraft carriers 50 years down the road. That's been eroded and degraded in some ways, and in some areas we're doing better. And of course, most importantly, being able to keep the free flow and movement of capital, goods, ideas, people around the world. The Japanese have been tremendous partners in this, and our colleagues at METI and my old role working with ATLA closely, we were really left seat, right seat on thinking about the interplay between markets and national security. And I'll kind of break these into two buckets. One, you have President Trump, President Biden, Congress through the Select Committee on China are really signaling we have to do something about this. We have to think about this. We have to put the infrastructure in place to positively influence markets to our national economic benefit. The challenge is the markets are huge. They do what they want a lot of times, and outside of strict thou shall not illegal activity and huge capital incentives over here, the markets are going to flow as they want. So what we're trying to do is understand how you can kind of bracket those two things. You have CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment, export controls, and some of those on the thou shall not side. And then you have the new creation under Secretary Austin and President Biden of Office of Strategic Capital. So that's no longer saying we're going to invest in defense because it's good for us. It's we're going to deploy capital in very surgical and strategic ways to help drive market outcomes that are beneficial to the United States and to Japan and to Korea and to the rest of our allies and partners around the world. So I'd say that the Department of Defense, if you will, probably had 2 or 3 folks who'd completed economics courses in the 80s and 90s, and maybe in the early 2000s, where our specialty is in engineering and other things, policy, and that's changed a lot. We're getting a lot of bankers in, a lot of MBAs, a lot of folks who think about this relationship, and it's really refreshing to see. And then again, working closely with partners like Japan on this so that we are not doing this alone, and we're not trying to push the market in an unfavorable way, or that's something that the Japanese then have to respond to rather than be working with us on. So those are kind of my comments on the new state of play in the last few years that I've seen.
Great. And our last speaker on the panel, last but not least, is Tom Duesterberg, Senior Fellow here at Hudson. Tom is a longtime friend and mentor, was Chief of Staff to Senator Dan Quayle, served as Assistant Secretary of Commerce for International Trade. He holds a PhD in European history, taught at Stanford, was the longtime head of the Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovation, and really has a deep knowledge of America's manufacturing base, and also was, and I always refer to this when I introduced Tom, in 1997 he was Senior Fellow here at Hudson Institute, wrote an op-ed saying that China should not be allowed into the World Trade Organization, explained why, that holy hell rained down on Tom and on Hudson Institute from people who disagreed with him in those years in the Capitol. But that op-ed reads as well today as it did then, and Tom was right, and those who were against him at that point have since admitted to me that Tom was absolutely right. So on that note, look forward to hear your insights.
Okay, well, thanks, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here with a lot of my old Japanese friends as well. The last few days have been a theme, I think, of U.S.-Japan cooperation here at Hudson. And yesterday I was in Nashville, Tennessee with Senator Haggerty, a former ambassador to Japan. And we did a similar event. He could have made the same remarks as Governor Holcomb. Tennessee is also home to a massive amount of Japanese investment, not just Japanese, but lots of foreign investment in the auto sector and other sectors. On the subject of China, too, Senator Haggerty revealed, he doesn't talk about this much, but he was the economic development director for the state of Tennessee before he became more active in politics. And one of the interesting decisions that he made back in around 2010, 2011, as economic developer of the state of Tennessee, was to close down their development office in Shanghai. So he saw the light as well, I think, that China was going to be a competitor rather than a source of cooperation. So I'd like to just quickly go through what I think are some data points on how U.S.-Japan cooperation in the interests of maintaining economic vitality in the face of Chinese aggressiveness and Chinese use of mercantilist policies to try to dominate many of the industries of the future. And they've already come to dominate some in the manufacturing sector. But I have 4 or 5 different areas, some of which Mr. Nishikawa mentioned, that I'd like to go through just to make the point that the cooperation has been deep and long-standing between our 2 countries, and we need to continue to be aggressive about expanding this. One area I've worked on a lot in the last 10 years is telecommunications, and there's been this quest to find an alternative to the Chinese operator Huawei and ZTE to a certain extent. There's a technology called Open Radio Access Networks, Open RAN, which is really a Western developed, US developed technology that I think has a lot of promise. Even though the technology may have, I think, been sort of pioneered here in the United States, it's the Japanese who have implemented it. The major Japanese company, or NTT Docomo, just very recently have implemented a nationwide system using Open RAN, and they have a offering called Open RAN Ecosystem Experience, or OREX, that they will help other telecom operators to implement these systems, which are very hard to do in terms of systems integration. So that's one area where I think we need to continue cooperating. Mr. Nishikawa mentioned rare earths, and Japan is at the epicenter of Chinese efforts to undermine our ability to free us from dependence on China, because Japan, as is the United States, is very dependent on rare earths processed mostly in China. And now China has, as Mr. Nishikawa mentioned, put new export restrictions on gallium, germanium, and graphite, all critical materials for things like advanced magnets, for semiconductors, for certain green technologies. Japan has been looking into deep sea mining as a source of getting the raw materials that we need. The United States is stepping up its efforts to build processing capabilities, thanks in some large part to our Department of Defense and DARPA. So this is an area where I think we need to continue to cooperate. Mr. Nishikawa also mentions semiconductor area, and I think there's been good cooperation between the United States and Europe, for that matter, in the whole ecosystem of the semiconductor industry that we need to continue. To my way of thinking, there is somewhat of a danger of competitive industrial policies undermining this sort of cooperation. We passed the CHIPS Act. The Europeans tried to put in a competitive effort to localize production in Europe. The Japanese have a $4 billion CHIPS Act, so to speak, none of which are quite really enough to make a real difference. I think it would be much better for us to keep the current ecosystem vibrant. Japan does chemicals of various sorts. They make memory chips and all sorts of things. The Europeans are good at semiconductor equipment. The United States is good at software, semiconductor equipment, and will, thanks to our industrial policy, become a producer again of fabrication plants. The auto industry is much in the news today with the danger of Chinese electric vehicles taking over markets in Europe and the United States. But I think there's been a little bit, probably too much focus on pure battery electric vehicles. The Japanese automakers have been world leaders. They control 35 or 40% of the market share in the United States based on production, mostly based on production in the United States, but they're pioneers and have perfected hybrid technology. My view is that hybrid technology is going to be probably the leading edge, the transition technology to the time where we can get to a more electric vehicle market. We do not have the infrastructure, the electricity production or transmission infrastructure to build in the timeframes that we're talking about a vibrant EV industry. In the defense sector, I'm being a little bit audacious here with Mr. Rader on the panel, but a couple of things that I've noted. There's lots of joint production, for instance, between Japan and the United States. Aerospace is one area. I would note that Boeing has long produced or been reliant on Japanese manufacturers for things like advanced materials. The airframes for their major planes are largely made in Japan. 16% of the 767 and 21% of the 777 planes made are in the United States by Boeing are with products from Japanese makers. Kawasaki Heavy is producing Chinook helicopters. Mitsubishi Heavy is producing fighter planes with U.S. technology. I think all of this is good. I hope one area I think we need to look at with more cooperation with Japan is in shipbuilding, where we have this immense deficit in our ability to produce not only what we need, but what we need to compete with China. And finally, a little bit out of the sort of pure manufacturing and technology sphere, I think we need to cooperate more with Japan on development aid. Japan is very good globally at producing infrastructure. Japan, it's little known, I think, ranks number 3 in overseas development assistance among Western nations. Here again, we're competing with China, and one of the negative effects of what the Chinese are doing is they've subsidized their way through the Belt and Road program to control of a lot of the minerals, both rare earths and more abundant minerals like lithium or copper around the world, and it's partly because they're willing to put more money into overseas development aid than we are. There have been initiatives in recent years announced by the Tokyo G7, I think it was Tokyo G7, for a $900 billion commitment to overseas development aid, which I think need to be followed through. But looking at our ability to compete with China here too, I think is something we need to take more seriously. let me stop there and.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom. That was, thanks, John, and thank you, Nishikawa-san. It's been a very interesting set of presentations. And let me turn first to Nishikawa-san. Let me ask you, how central is economic security to METI's mission as you see it?
Thank you. Unfortunately, it became very central of the METI or the Japanese government economic policy. Because then, just as I said, the world is becoming, unstable. So therefore, we have to defend our supply chain or the technological basis. So that in order to that we have to first define the risks and threat to our supply chain and to defend that with our allies. So therefore, without consideration of the economic securities, our economy and supply chain or the technology cannot sustain. So that is then the Tokyo's atmosphere. I can say that.
Let me ask you a follow-up, because it used to be business deals would be done on the basis of price and quality, pretty straightforward. Now there's this third element, the question of economic security, which obviously raises the cost for activities. Even over the long term, it means that the supply chains will be less threatened by economic coercion. How has that changed things in the private sector and in business-government interactions? And how much pushback are you seeing in this area?
To be very frank, between the government and the industries or the business, of course, then the important point is that we have to keep market economy and free trade should be center. So therefore, the economic security effort, in other words, government intervention to the market economy, the free trade, should be exceptional. The so-called, the small yard high fence policy is very important. So in this regard, when we discuss the economic security policy with the industries, just as I said, we are very keen to define why we have to intervene the business, market economy, or the free trade, because of risks or the threat caused by geopolitical considerations, malicious will, economic coercion. So therefore, government is willing to help it. And in other words, if we cannot detect big threat or the risks, the government have to restrain. So we would like to avoid the protectionist measures with the name of the economic security. Some countries like them, I don't want to designate that, but some may, how can I say, mix the intentionally or unintentionally, the economic security policy as a national security or just protection measure. So we would like to define the threat and the risks when we talk with industries in Japan.
Okay, great, thank you. John, let me ask you a question about given your experience both at the Defense Innovation Unit and now the new Strategic Capital Office of Strategic Capital. When investments are being made, how willing are these units willing to make investments overseas? What percentage and what role does Japan play in this in those two relatively new units?
So, you have the traditional market economics of competitive advantage. Not every country can be great at everything. Some countries are really good at some things. And the JP Morgans and BlackRocks and Goldmans of the world are great at spotting deals. So if there's an industry that a line in Japan that's being made and it's the best in the world, which they do many things very, very well, then the banks and the capital partners and providers are already flooding there. but there's things that matter to our country that the US government should not or cannot sufficiently do. And so we're trying to find ways to incentivize the market to also add on to those and really tip and cue them in those directions. And so chips is a perfect example where you'd say, okay, we have an insufficient domestic production of chips at home. And if you go to any bank and say, please go build it for us, they say, you need a help. And we, our ultimate fiduciary duty is back to shareholders and to our investors. And so we're trying to match the two there to say, you need to help because this is important for long-term sustainability of the US economy, of your company, of all the other things and luxuries that we enjoy, but also as a true national security mandate here that without this, we'd have to, and I'm making up numbers here, we'd have to quadruple the defense budget tomorrow because we'd have to subsidize this and build it ourselves at home. And that's just not a healthy relationship between the markets and the government. I would argue, some disagree. So programs like CHIPS are meant to really indicate to the market, this is where we're going. We have a ton of capital we're pushing this way. We also have end users in the government that are gonna buy this. And so we're trying to kind of vertically integrate this supply chain and the demand signal all into one, so that then the market, the $2 trillion of dry powder that you hear that's currently in the market, or the $46 trillion of capital that is the US economy in the investing space, can really start angling in on that, saying, oh, that matters more than this other stuff. And it's not to neglect marketplaces or industries or capabilities, but it's really meant to say, of these critical technologies or of these insufficient areas, these are the ones that matter most, and we're gonna work with you to do that. So some of the things we're focused on too within Office of Strategic Capital or Defense Innovation Unit is really good information sharing with both manufacturers, end users, and then capital partners. So instead of saying, please go build us drones, we can say, we want these kinds of drones to do these kinds of things in this kind of place. And I don't think we've done that before. And so Dr. Hicks and Doug Beck, the director of DIU, the Replicator Initiative, really focuses on kind of solidifying that into, that's a messaging cycle. It's not go build drones or go build this very specific one that doesn't really have a market presence. It's kind of blending that all together and then sharing that so capital partners play a role. And of course, the whole backdrop of this is doing it with allies and partners. So doing it jointly with the Japanese, doing it in collaboration and coordination with the Japanese or other allies and partners. AUKUS is another perfect example where we think interoperability is going to be huge for deterrence. And if unfortunately a war is to occur, for us to make sure we win it, interoperability is going to be key to that. So we can't just build things and then sell them to people. We have to do it with them. We have to be lockstep on it from both the development, design, all the way to the use. And so that's definitely a priority right now for us. And we want the market to be there with us as we really try to increase scale and manufacturing and really mature its market presence.
And so David, in terms of the focus on Japan in particular, so are you seeing Japanese, so when the signals are being sent, are you co-investing with the Japanese as of yet, or is that something you see as a potential?
Yeah, the potential is real and it's recognized. I won't get ahead of leadership here. Just to say that we're working with them closely. I mean, the director, Doug Beck, the secretary, constant meaningful engagement to really narrow in on achievable projects. So this isn't just, oh, we're going to build a satellite together. And I'm making that up, but it's a product, but we're going to build a very specific thing that we know has a place in the market that we can use together. So this isn't just about collaboration, it's about true partnership in a very narrow space that you can build off of.
Okay, very interesting. Tom, let me ask you, since you brought up the EV example versus hybrids, and the Japanese, obviously Toyota is the prime example that decided hybrid was the future, and then there have been, I would say, policy pressures in the US and elsewhere that have led to a kind of a major government incentive on EVs. When you make the kinds of decisions that David is talking about, I mean, how do you think through those kinds of decisions to make sure you don't sort of, I mean, obviously the big fear with EVs is the dependence on China with regard to critical minerals and China's growing role in the EV battery market. And so how do you make sure that you are seeing far enough down the line that when you make a decision that you think will be critical to the future of your economic security, that you're not, in essence, becoming more dependent as a result?
Well, I mean, that's obviously the problem with too rapid a forced adoption of EVs in this country. It is in Europe as well, because the Chinese are poised to enter these markets. And somebody was showing me the other day BYD vehicle that looks exactly like one of the advanced Porsche all-electric cars, and the Porsche was like 125,000 starting, and the BYD was a 35. We simply, at this point in time, cannot make these vehicles to compete with the Chinese. So I think as we adopt public policy, we shouldn't try to move things faster than the production capacity, the efficient production capacity of our manufacturing industry will allow. So in the case of EVs, that's why I brought up the idea of which the Japanese recognized long ago, that hybrid technology can get us partway to where we want to be in terms of our environmental objectives. And they perfected the technology. And by the way, Ford just this week, I think, made an announcement that they are going to start producing hybrids all up and down their product line. I think that's a little bit of a change, because they've pulled back on their battery electric vehicle production quite a bit. So to me, the question is really, don't try to force things faster than our manufacturing economy can actually produce those in an efficient way, in a way that the market accepts the products. We may have to, since you implied the additional question, what are we going to do about China? I mean, I think we're going to have to challenge them, because we all know, and it's we, including at long last, the Europeans know that the Chinese have heavily subsidized their electric vehicle industry, and we need to do some countervailing duty or cases like the Europeans have already started. And I believe that an easy entry of the Chinese into our market would be disastrous for our own industry.
Thank you, Tom. David, let me throw one last question at you, and then we'll go to the audience. And yesterday here at Hudson, a number of us took part in a closed-door briefing that our colleague Sham Casapolo did on open source intelligence in Ukraine. And one of the interesting things, he showed the new drones that the Iranians have built and were building in Russia until a Ukrainian strike on the facility just a few days ago. And one of the most dramatic things in the briefing, and this is all open source intelligence, is that more than half of the guts of these Iranian drones come from. A lot of it comes from the United States. They're components that may be used in consumer goods or other things. I'm asking you this more in your former CFIUS capacity than in your DIU, OSC, or DARPA capacity. But how do you deal with the challenge of it literally is dual-use software that can, or dual-use components that can be used for cutting-edge and highly dangerous weaponry?
It is a constant problem. My first talking point, just in my own personal capacity, is export controls. You need better enforcement. You need more real-time export control analysis on these products, especially as the market moves so much faster than government can. Now these components you're talking about specifically aren't that kind of stuff, but you could get that with AI or machine learning or quantum sensing specifically. We're working really hard on trying to educate companies of, yes, you do think you make just an altimeter, but that altimeter can be used to do other things. So before you say, this doesn't go to a missile, like, what do I care? Yeah. Well, it may. And so we're working a lot on getting education out there, export enforcement. And then there is hopefully a world which exists where we can incentivize middle market actors to not make that last sale and that last transit from making up the value chain here from the US to Canada, Canada, Finland, Finland to Poland, Poland to country X, and country X then into this finished product that's being used to harm us. So we're looking at the entire supply chain. We're trying to map these things, the flow of products, and really narrow in on the points where you could say, this is, if we could just get you to turn left instead of right, then that we could stop a little bit more of that. But to your point, because it is just core dual use commercial tech, it is really, really tough to clamp down on.
Okay. On that note, let's open it up for questions for our panelists. Great, and please identify yourself and.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we're on. Hi, David Parker from the National Graduate Institute of Policy Studies in Tokyo. First, would just like to commend Nishikawa-san and Yoichi Ida-san and others at the National Security Secretary in Japan for sort of what I think is really a model of clear thinking on economic security and the leadership that you've done both through the G7 and elsewhere on this important issue. I wanted to pick up one of the points that Dr. Duesterberg had mentioned about the challenge of competitive industrial policy. In some ways right now, we're at the easy part of the journey. There's where we get to sort of dispense these funds, get to see sort of wonderful new products, sort of factories and others sort of going into the ground, producing things. But these are really in many ways strategic gambles. So some of them will succeed, some of them may very well fail. And so how do we ensure and put in place mechanisms today so that over the long term, we're actually going to be developing, as the U.S. and Japan, complementary capabilities rather than capabilities that may, ultimately cancel each other out and end up ceding leadership to perhaps adversarial states such as the People's Republic of China.
Great question.
Well, it's a tough thing to do. In our haste to get to an battery EV world, I think we've frankly moved much too quickly. And our the IRA Act, which provides the subsidies, which are pretty open-ended for both production and consumer subsidies, are going to end up costing us quite a bit. So there could be some fiscal discipline built into the system in a better way than it has been so far. I sort of like the model that has haphazardly, to a certain extent, evolved between the United States and Korea, South Korea for that matter, and Europe in the auto industry, where the Europeans make the high-end stuff, we make trucks, we make SUVs. The Japanese have been leaders in passenger automobiles, but now in the hybrid sector, I'd be perfectly content just to, with, the term friend shoring is a broad one, but let's define it to include production both inside and outside the United States for taking advantage of complementary capacities. I think we just need to admit that we can't do everything efficiently on our own, and we have to develop this ecosystem of friends. And I think, at this point in time, we sort of know who all of who they are. But we have to develop that and depend on sort of competition that Governor Holcomb talked about between states. It has to continue to operate at an international level, and that's, some form of economic efficiency. By the way, we need to cut China out of that system because they don't play by the same rules.
Anybody else have any comments? No. Yeah. Hudson Senior Fellow Riley Walters.
Oh, thank you for introducing me. Hi. We were talking about incentivizing the private sector, and I think a lot of people watching this are interested on that sort of process of incentivizing, sort of sending signals to the market. And this week we have Janet Yellen in Beijing. We had a number of American CEOs in China most recently. And so, how do we encourage that sort of signaling that we would prefer, right? The moving private capital out of China, encouraging officials within the White House to maybe be signaling that we don't want the investment going into China as much as we want. We want the partnering between the United States and Japan to be expanding domestically between our two countries, not in maybe a third country, for example.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the undeniable truth is, China's still our biggest trade partner. It's actually, it's grown, it's kind of flatlined a little bit, but in general, I mean, they have a significant market presence that we can't neglect or pretend isn't there. But to your core point is, there are things we don't want to partner with them on economically because of their coercive nature, because of their rhetoric about, challenging our position in the world and the way we view the world. So you have put on my old CFIUS hat on the thou shall not. It only works so well. So the idea of outbound investment screening, there's going to be some severe limitations to its efficacy. And I say this playfully, lawyers and bankers are smarter than policymakers and regulators. It's a function of incentives, not because they truly are smarter, but because if a banker can get a deal closed, he or she can make $15 million on it versus the GS14 at Commerce who's going to make their same salary. So they will work very creative ways to make that capital get there to then grow for them. So you need to find a different incentive tool, which I would argue should probably come through tax incentives. We should be waiving capital gains taxes or building out free trade agreements with countries to help maybe shift free trade agreements and then tax incentives on top of that. You could do foreign direct investment or directed investment from the government into areas like we've talked about with chips or into auto manufacturing. From a political football question, governor should be back here. He can answer that better than I can. I'm not sure people want to see our national debt grow and the name to win industries back, but I do think there are some creative tax levers that we have not probably sufficiently pulled to help signal to the market and to shift supply lines into maybe a US-Japan line for some, or US-Korea line that right now is quite disparate.
Well, I would invoke sort of a transparency principle. It has become clearer and clearer that even to the business community itself, that operating successfully in China is becoming more and more difficult as Xi Jinping and the PRC criticize and make it more difficult for the private sector to operate, not only foreign firms, but domestic firms as well. So those investment opportunities that 30 years ago we all thought were going to be, stupendous, and actually, let's admit it, investments in our auto companies and the European auto companies into China were successful. They're not as successful now as they once were, and that experience is being replicated. So just talking about openly how difficult it is to do business in China and what the tools that the Chinese have to squeeze American and European, Japanese companies in China itself, I think would be a powerful incentive to cause second thoughts about investing in those markets, in that market.
And let me turn, thank you. Let me turn to Nishikawa. Let me, if you have anything to add on that, let me just ask you.
May I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Jump in. Yeah. Thank you. Maybe I would like to add the two things. The one is that, that because now the Japan or the United States is a freer society, we cannot force the industries or the business to do some things. So therefore, we would like to enlighten their mindset. That what will happen if that something happens. So in this regard, for example, the TTX or the simulations or the wargaming, this type of the exercise is usually done by the U.S. forces or the Japanese self-defense forces, military peoples. However, the ordinary industries or business may join such kind of TTX simulation wargaming with no military invasion type things. Just as the many the U.S. think tanks is doing, or the university is doing, like the MIT is doing, to experience the economic coercion types, the effect. This is one, and the second is then pressure from the investors. Sometimes works, of course. For example, the ESG square that someone is saying, ESG is the environment, society, and governance. But to add geo-economical or the geopolitical consideration to that may change the CEOs or the board of directors mindset to consider the more the risk assessment of economic security considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Jim Lucier, question over here. And we'll make this the last one here, Jim. Let's wait for the microphone because we've got the audience. Great.
Thank you, Ken. I'm Jim Lucier with Capital Alpha Partners. We've had a wonderful discussion here of advanced manufacturing and many important technologies. But on a more fundamental level, I wonder, what can the U.S. and Japan do together to reduce our dependence on Chinese critical minerals and rare earths, especially in areas where 80 to 90% of both the sourcing and the processing is done in China? And perhaps also, what could U.S. energy exports do to further build the economic partnership of U.S. and Japan?
I don't have an answer to the second part, the energy exports. I'll leave that one off the table. On the first side, so the Development Finance Corporation is up for reauthorization at the end of the year. I imagine you will see some congressional intent come down to make them start investing in extraction, beneficiation chains along the way. I know that there are a lot of U.S. companies who are starting to recognize value in this space as alpha dries up in other tech parts that maybe before was more lucrative. And so there are also, as you mentioned, there have been and there will continue to be U.S. government investing in this, in processing domestically and extraction of favorable sites. One of the challenges that remains is that you don't have a body dedicated to this mission. What you really need is like a Department of Supply Chain Security or critical, because it's such a big problem. And because everybody cares, energy, defense, commerce, state, everybody has equities here. And for that reason, it kind of falls outside of anybody's purview. I mean, the National Security Council, people are tracking, but nobody really owns it. And so what you really need is a department to own it, and then to be able to direct capital in strategic ways into, say, we care about cobalt maybe more than we do copper. We're really going to focus on building out the supply chain. We're going to get it right, and doing that jointly with our allies and partners, so we make sure we don't just do it for ourselves and then they're left in the same boat and they're going to remain reliant on China, or that also that the Chinese don't continue to flood pricing the market, kill that industry, and then ruin and spoil our investment. So I would just say that there's a lot of good interagency work on this. There's a lot of good public-private partnership on this. There is still room for incredible improvement and some real checks to be cut by the U.S. government into these areas, or some other incentive packages to get the private capital markets to step into it. But I can tell you, on the bilateral, multilateral country engagement piece, as well as the private-public engagement piece, I have never seen it stronger in this area. The recognition of this vulnerability, as well as the real market mover, which is, there's a ton of capital to be gained and sought here that everybody is finally awoken to, the U.S. government included.
Jim, what was the question about energy?
No.
Energy exports.
Right, energy exports, whether, for instance, exports of ammonia to Japan for use in power, not only LNG, but hydrogen-based products, or other ways that the United States is comparative advantage in their production to assist the chemicals industry or the manufacturing industry.
Well, just to focus on that question, I'm an unadulterated exponent of exporting our abundant resources of energy, including fossil fuel energies. They're much in demand around the world, including in the developing world. And the decision by the Biden administration to freeze LNG export licenses I think was a terrible mistake. And just as night follows day, the Qataris doubled their plans to build new LNG export capacity. And by the way, the Russians are taking advantage of the inability of the United States to export and continue to grow exports by selling, albeit at a discount, to many places around the world. You know, our own production of fossil fuels, I think, is much more efficient and much cleaner than that of Russia or many of the competitors that we have. And we ought to emphasize that as one reason to continue to support the production and export not only of fossil fuels, but other products, chemical products, for instance, derived from that, and to ease up some of the regulatory policies that prevent the efficient production and rapid coming to market of these products.
Nishikawa-san, do you have anything to add on this, or it's getting late there in Tokyo?
Yeah, two things. The one is that, the demand side, the approach, usually the price, Dr. Thomas is right, that the price sometimes doesn't reflect, the environmental consideration, human rights consideration, the future, the resilient considerations. So therefore, we have to think about that to create fair and sustainable demand procurement rules among the US, Japan, or the European Unions, or the like-minded countries, and to respect to that, and to encourage the business follow such kind of rules. This is first. And the second is then, just as Dr. Thomas said previously, the third countries or emerging economies or the global south, these economies are sometimes become the good diversification venues for the critical minerals or the legacy semiconductor or the traditional batteries or the solar panel. So therefore, we means the US or the Japan jointly encourage these, the environment emerging economies to create, diversified supply sources. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Nishikawa-san. It is approaching midnight there in Tokyo, and really grateful. And I guess it's approaching 2 a.m. But approaching 2 a.m. there in Tokyo. I think we're going to let you get some sleep, and I really want to thank you for those very enlightening remarks. I want to thank Tom Duesterberg of Hudson for coming back early on an early flight from Nashville for his enlightening remarks. And I really want to thank David Rader and especially Mrs. Rader for allowing you to make your insightful remarks. We are now going to break for a very quick lunch. Buffet lunch will be served out there, and then we're going to come in and have the second panel, which will look at the impact of foreign direct investment in the United States. And so please, we'll try to move between the panels as quickly as possible. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
I thought I called you John. I was thinking.
Go up to the podium. It's a little difficult to get there.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for this wonderful conference on U.S.-Japan economic relations. Obviously, we had terrific comments by the governor of Indiana earlier this morning on the importance of the U.S.-Japanese relationship, as well as the invigorating conversation that Ken just led on U.S.-Japanese opportunities for economic security cooperation. As all of y'all dig into your lunch boxes, I want to welcome everyone to this panel on Japanese foreign investment in the U.S. market, its impact, and also possible steps going forward. And for me, this is a personal panel for me because I did my PhD at Ohio State on post-war Japanese commercial exports in the U.S. market. And this panel is sort of a homecoming for me, getting a chance to speak with people from JETRO, JAMA, and Ohio. I guess we'll just jump straight into opening remarks. But for introductions, to my left is Satoshi Miura-san, president of Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, in the New York office. Before taking up his position last July, he had a long career in Japanese government in both the cabinet and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, serving in roles pertaining to trade, energy, and regional economies in Japan. He previously served as the economic counselor of the Japanese embassy back in 2007 and to 2010, so it's wonderful to welcome him back to Washington, D.C., and received the MBA from Yale and a LLB from Todai, two institutions I'm very fond of. So with that, Miura-san, please share us your thoughts.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming here today and having me today. So I'm going to share with you my view and some of the information about how Japanese companies or industries are doing in these countries in the context of FDI. First of all, I would like let me start with the overall picture of Japan's outward investment. Japan's outward investment position is over $2 trillion. And among that, the U.S. stands out as the largest, accounting for 33.5%, whereas EU accounts for only 16%, 1/6, about half that of the U.S. China, by the way, accounts for 7%. For the U.S., Japan is the largest source country for investment, ranking first since 2019. So as the scale of the investment indicates, the contribution of Japanese companies to the U.S. economy is significant. For example, Japanese manufacturers in the U.S. create more than 530,000 jobs, ranking first among all countries investing in the U.S. And also Japanese companies in the U.S. Account for more than 4% of all U.S. exports, ranking first by country. So now you remember the comment from the Governor Holcomb earlier. So this should give you an idea of how much Japanese companies contribute to the U.S. economy. Now, looking at the breakdown by industry, looking at Japanese investment in the U.S. by industry, as you know, the manufacturing sector dominates, accounting for about 45%. Among these, chemicals is the largest, accounting for about 15%. Transportation equipment at just under 10% is the second largest in the manufacturing sector. Outside of manufacturing, wholesale trade and finance and insurance follow. Within the chemical sector, investment in the pharmaceuticals and medicines is expected to be significant. Takeda's acquisition of Shire in 2019 boosted the balance of Japanese investments in the U.S. Other than Takeda's investment, for example, Nippon Shinyaku announced that it opens a new facility called Innovation Research Partnering in Massachusetts in January 2023. By establishing a base within the ecosystem formed by world-class universities, their affiliated hospitals, and a cluster of bioventure companies in the state, the company aims to accelerate and diversify drug discovery research while leveraging open innovation. In May 2023, Astellas announced the acquisition of U.S. biopharmaceutical company Iveric Bio, with a view to obtaining new drugs in the field of ophthalmology. The company said it is committed to creating innovative drugs, and this acquisition is an important step in that direction. In semiconductor industry, the CHIPS Act is stimulating investment in the US. Many Japanese companies are the suppliers of Intel and Taiwan's TSMC, and several Japanese companies have established operations in Arizona as a result of TSMC's expansion into the state. For instance, JX Nippon Mining Metals held a groundbreaking ceremony for a semiconductor-related facility in Arizona. In the future, the plant is expected to become the center of the company's advanced materials business in the US, and will also be used as a new business development base. EV-related investment, especially in batteries, are flourishing in the Southeast, like European and Korean firms. Suppliers' EV-related investments are driven by increased investment by OEMs. In addition, there have been moves to invest in the recycling business with an eye to future increases in battery demand. Marubeni Corporation, a major trading company, has invested in Server Solutions, a US battery recycling company. These investments are expected to be influenced by the recent policies of the Biden administration. I understand that the Biden administration's major industrial policy is rooted in an executive order to strengthen supply chains issued in 2021. This executive order lists 10 areas that are important for national security, and pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and the EV batteries are all included in this list. Like the CHIPS Act in semiconductors, the Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Initiative encourage investment for the pharmaceutical sector. This initiative helps the development of infrastructure for the domestic biotechnology industry. For EV batteries, subsidies based on the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act encourage investment to the US. Japanese companies are likely to see this situation as a commercial opportunity and are expanding their investments. However, one of the most frequently asked questions we receive these days is whether these subsidies will continue to be given in the future as planned. So some Japanese firms say that they are making midterm plans assuming there will be subsidies from IRA. So in particular, most of the funds in the IRA are earmarked for climate change measures. And there are several voices expressing concern about the future of the IRA. According to JETRO's survey of Japanese companies in the US, among the Biden administration's policies, climate change measures such as IRA have the most positive impact. Japanese companies, especially major trading companies, are moving into wind and solar power generation. Investments in renewable energies are likely to be large, so this would be affected by the policy of subsidies. Even for investments in EVs, there are concerns that demand will decline in the near future, so government subsidies are likely to become even more important. Ensuring such predictability will be important if the US is to consistently attract investment in the future. Other challenges for Japanese companies investing in the US is the recent different rules from state to state. As noted at the beginning of my remarks, Japan is the largest investor to the US in terms of the amount of investment, but also in terms of the number of companies. Japan ranked in the top 3 in all 50 states among all foreign investor countries. Furthermore, it is ranked first in 39 states. But because of these widespread operations across the US, the fact that rules vary from state to state, such as immigration policies and reproductive freedom, can become a cost of doing business for Japanese companies. The Eurasia Group's top risks of 2024 pointed out this as a risk for Japan. I understand that it is not practical to unify state rules throughout the US. However, as I explained, Japanese companies contribute to the US economy, and they have a culture of treating their employees like family. Therefore, I believe that creating an investment-friendly environment for Japanese companies would be a win-win situation for both the US and Japan. To strengthen US-Japan economic relations through investment, JETRO has recently been supporting Japanese startups to expand their business overseas. We bring selected Japanese startups to Silicon Valley and create opportunities to visit incubation facilities and have a networking with venture capitalists and US startups. Furthermore, JETRO operates a business platform named J-Bridge for the creation of international open innovation between Japanese companies and overseas startups. We believe that in addition to traditional manufacturing investment in new areas such as innovation and startups will build more multi-layered economic corporations. Misplaced the memo here. So I do expect that the layer of the cooperation will expand, and we hope the economic cooperation in both ways occur. And in that context, I would like to finally mention the investment in Japan. So we looked at the big investment from Japan to the US, but compared to that, the invest from the US to Japan is relatively modest. So I would like to encourage US business or companies to invest more in Japan. And actually, so investment in Japan is for market opportunities or technology cooperation. So unlike the investment in the developing countries, it is not for the orientation of stealing the jobs from the US. So I think in light of those contexts as well, I would like to welcome US industries or companies to make investment in Japan. So that's what I have to say. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your wonderful comments there, Miyota-san. I apologize. I think in my excitement to kick off this panel, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm William Chu. I'm Japan Chair Fellow here at Hudson Institute. And I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Anita Rajan, who's the General Director of the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, USA. Before taking up her position back in May 2022, Anita worked at Mitsubishi Motors R&D in the US for nearly 20 years, particularly in the area of government and regulatory affairs, and was most recently the manager of government affairs with MRDA's Government and Industry Relations Department before taking up her position at JAMA. She has an MA from George Mason and a bachelor's in foreign service from Georgetown, so she's always been in DC, and was born and raised in New Jersey, which you know, is a problem for me as a New York guy. But you know, but I won't hold that against you. My sister lives in Jersey now. It's fine. It's fine.
They just had an earthquake today, apparently.
Yeah, I heard. I hope things are okay.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
For that introduction, and thank you to the Hudson Institute for hosting this conference and this important panel. So I'm up here. I guess I'm a bit of the case study on the panel here. Japanese brand automakers' U.S. story is a prime example of how foreign direct investment coupled with deep commitment to the U.S. market, its workforce, and its communities can result in decades of success. In our case, this is a story that is over 40 years in the making and one that is still being written today. This is a story of good quality FDI. And that goes beyond simply delivering on a business plan and focuses on people-centered growth and a long-term vision. Our members' success in the US has not only benefited those that they directly employ, but in fact, their investments support over 2.2 million US jobs, including dealer, supplier, and service jobs. This is also a story of commitment. A lot has happened in this country over the past 4+ decades, whether it's policy changes, economic downturns, heightened political tensions, and of course, a pandemic. Yet Japanese brand automakers' investments have not diminished with these challenges. As a matter of fact, according to data that we just released this past Wednesday, Japanese brand automakers' cumulative manufacturing investment has reached an all-time high of $61.6 billion in 2023, and total direct employment rose to over 109,000. This is an incredible story, but not one that everyone knows. And ironically, this may actually be a reflection of our members' success here. As Japanese brand automakers' roots in the US have grown and strengthened, they have become a seamless part of the American landscape. And while the positive top-line numbers, such as the billions of dollars invested, the scores of people in communities across the US who have benefited from high-quality jobs and careers may grab headlines, as they should, the specifics of what Japanese brand automakers continue to contribute to the US beyond these top-line numbers should also receive a spotlight. And as JAMA, we look to amplify that spotlight. So if you indulge me, a few of those specifics. Just this week, as part of Toyota USA Foundation's Driving Possibilities initiative, $2 million in grants were announced for programs to help prepare students in North Carolina's Randolph and Guilford counties for future science, technology, engineering, math, STEM careers. These particular counties are in and around where Toyota will open its first battery manufacturing plant in 2025. Another battery manufacturing facility is steadily moving towards completion with a goal of starting production in 2025, and that is the Honda and LG Energy Solutions joint venture battery manufacturing facility with projected investment of $4.4 billion in Ohio. This facility is part of a larger EV hub that Honda is creating from its existing manufacturing facilities in Ohio as it transitions to electric vehicle production. And an example of another partnership, and this one is longstanding and has touched many lives. Nissan has an 18-year partnership with Habitat for Humanity. During this time, Nissan employees have volunteered over 112,000 hours and have helped build homes for over 300 families in communities near Nissan's major manufacturing and operational locations. Subaru of Indiana, an established sustainability leader amongst US industry in general, notably became America's first zero landfill automaker 10 years ago. In another example of a longtime partnership, through support through the Mazda Foundation, food scarcity in Southern California continues to be addressed through its 19th consecutive year of support of the Second Harvest Food Bank. And keeping the spotlight local, Mitsubishi Motors North America runs a community utility vehicle, CUV, program where the company offers vehicle loans to nonprofit organizations. To us, these details are what help define good quality FDI. Throughout this year, we intend to focus that spotlight on many more examples as we continue to examine JAMA members' impact on US communities and automotive workforce in the areas of electrification, innovation, safety, and sustainability. We are confident that in telling our story, that those who may be critical of FDI will be reminded of the possibilities and the opportunities that are generated for Americans when FDI is people-centric, long-term, and focused on meaningful partnerships with communities. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for your comments, there, Anita. And speaking as someone who participated a great deal in the Japan American Society of Central Ohio that was generously sponsored by Honda, I have direct experience of the generosity of Japanese FDI and how it extends to communities. So thank you again. And so finally, we have Paul Sarasik. Got it. I got it. Sarasik, a professor of politics and international relations at Youngstown State, and also an adjunct fellow here with us at Hudson. His work focuses on trade policy and U.S.-Japan relations, and he has been the author of 3 books on U.S. politics and law, and is frequently a contributor to national and international media. Most notably, Paul was the in-studio analyst for NHK World during their coverage of the U.S. elections in 2018, 2020, and 2022. Can you tell us anything about, is 2024 going to happen?
I believe so.
Good. Well, so please tune in and watch out for Paul's analysis on NHK World. And he's twice been a Fulbright Scholar to Japan, and he got his PhD from Rutgers University and his BA from Albright College. Paul, podium is yours.
Thanks.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Will. And I'll also point out that, like Anita, I'm also originally from New Jersey, even though I've lived for the past couple decades in Ohio. So you got 2 Jersey connections here going forward. But I'm going to talk to you today about Ohio. A little bit of a pushback on Governor Holcomb. We in Ohio think that we're the center of Japanese FDI, and we think we can make that argument. But I want to talk a little bit about Ohio, foreign direct investment, politics, and economics, and sort of the link between these things. It's always dangerous when you give a college professor a podium and a microphone and a limited time to speak. But I'll try.
We'll cut the mic on you.
I'll try. You can play the music in the background, right? Ohio has a long-standing relationship with Japan, arguably the longest of any state. And it's not just Honda. And the 1980s, it goes all the way back to the turn of the last century. Ohio produces a lot of presidents, right? We produced William Howard Taft. And the cherry trees you see here in Washington, D.C. are the result of President Taft's relationship with Japan. That was multifaceted. It went back to his time as Secretary of Defense under Teddy Roosevelt when he negotiated with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida a memorandum that goes into the Portsmouth Treaty that ends the Japan-Russo War. So it goes back, and he was celebrated in Japan. That's eventually what leads to the cherry tree. So we have a long relationship. The longest serving ambassador to Japan, John Bingham, was from Ohio, an Ohio representative. John Bingham also wrote, by the way, the 14th Amendment, the most important amendment to our Constitution. And then he goes on to serve again for 12 years as ambassador to Japan. So we in Ohio have a long-standing relationship with Japan. Of course, Honda coming to the United States, to Ohio, back in the early 1980s when it was a time of great economic, political tension between Japan and the United States is very, very significant. But it's not just Honda. Japanese foreign direct investment in Ohio is almost unbelievable. Almost 900 Japanese-owned facilities in Ohio. 220 individual companies. More than 70,000 Ohioans are employed by Japanese companies. So it really is an incredible relationship. Again, it's not just Honda, it's also Bridgestone, which of course has a direct relationship with Japan and Japanese politics. I lived in Tokyo for a year, and when I moved to Tokyo in August of 2009, Yukio Hatoyama, right, had just been made prime minister when the DPJ came into power temporarily in Japan. Now, the Bridgestone family, the tire company headquartered in Tokyo, of course, is directly tied to Hatoyama's family and family money. Now, of course, the Hatoyama coming into power in Japan, also that year 2009, 2010, when I lived there, was another time of tension, right, between the United States and Japan, particularly over the bases in Okinawa. You also had 140-some Diet members, right, traveling to Beijing to meet with President there. So again, it was a time of some tension, which has since been resolved. I think we forget that sometimes after Prime Minister Abe, with relations becoming so strong between the United States and Japan and continue very strong. But the reason I bring that up is that these relationships need to be nurtured over time. And FDI contributes to the development and the nurturing of these relationships. So in that way, economics is part of politics and plays into politics. Now, given the long history that Japan and Ohio have together, it is somewhat stunning, right, that with the Nippon Steel deal that Ken talked about earlier today in his question of the governor of Indiana, but it's something that I think is behind a lot of our discussions today because we realize this sort of new tension with the opposition to the acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel, and one of the leaders of that opposition is, of course, a senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown. The other senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, right, has also spoken in opposition to this deal. So I want to talk about that a little bit and try to explain that a little bit so you kind of understand where it's coming from and perhaps how we can counter it, what we can do about it, how we can react to it. Economics and politics are related, but they sometimes point us in different directions. And I think when we're talking about Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel, we're talking much more about politics than we are talking about economics, right? Because the economics makes sense, but what doesn't make sense to some of our political officials are the politics of it. Very briefly, without giving you a long lecture on Ohio politics, I will tell you that if you look at Ohio, we call Ohio the heart of it all, in part because Ohio looks a little bit like a heart, but it's better off to think of Ohio as a big square. And if you look at the upper right square, upper right quadrant of Ohio, that's where all the change in Ohio politics has come from. That area used to be extremely Democratic. And if you look at the election results in 2008 and 2012, right, you'll see that area strongly supported Barack Obama for president. And Ohio supported Barack Obama for president. Starting in 2016, things changed. And the area that really changed was that upper right corner of Ohio. Now, what's up there in that upper right-hand corner? What cities are up there? And one of the big cities is the one that I teach in. I'm not really a large city, but historically, a significant city is Youngstown, Ohio. That's where the change took place. If you look at a county map, suddenly these longtime Democratic voters, and I will tell you as a political analyst, we were all stunned. The Republican Party did not exist in that part of Ohio. The person who actually hired me when I started teaching at Youngstown State was the former chair of the local Republican Party. And he used to joke that they could meet in a phone booth, right? Because it really, really didn't exist. And it had existed. If you go back to Herbert Hoover, back in the 1920s, 1930s, that area was Republican. It became Democratic in the 1930s under Roosevelt. It was labor that brought the Democratic Party in. It was organized labor. Because what did Youngstown do? Youngstown made steel. That's what they were known for. And with steel came American labor unions. And the labor unions brought the Democratic Party in. What's happened since the 1970s, 1980s, there's really no more steel made in the Youngstown area. There is a large sort of pipe manufacturing facility that took over the old mill property, Vallourec, a French-owned company, by the way, and when the original purchase was made, Vallourec and Sumitomo, a Japanese company, were sort of part of that original purchase and factory. Vallourec has since, I believe, bought out from Sumitomo, so it's purely the French-owned company now. But again, an example of FDI. So both senators are aware that ground zero in Ohio politics is the northeast corner. And Senator Brown's running for re-election. He needs those voters. J.D. Vance won, in part because of those voters. And steel has almost a mythic significance in that part of the country, even though we don't produce much steel anymore. It's sort of the legacy of it. Politics is about perception, not necessarily reality. Right? It's called U.S. Steel. I wonder what we would think if it was still USX, right? What it used to be called. It has the name U.S. in it, so it becomes significant. This despite the fact that Ohio is benefiting now so much from foreign direct investment and Japanese investment, also Korean investment, actually in that area, Taiwanese investment. The old General Motors plant north of Youngstown is now owned by Foxconn. And just down the road from it, you have this joint venture between Korea, South Korea, between LG Energy Solutions and General Motors. Right? So you have all this foreign direct investment up there. There's also more than 120 companies up in that area, Japanese companies that employ people. So you have all these jobs created by foreign direct investment, but the politics doesn't work. That leads, because I'm trying not to go on too long here, to what can we do about it? How can we change this? And what we need to do is speak to voters. Governor Holcomb clearly understood the value of Japanese foreign direct investment. If you spoke to Governor DeWine of Ohio, he would give a very, very similar talk. Elites understand, but the people that don't necessarily see this and understand are the voters, and voters matter. So what we need to do is get the message out to voters. Japanese companies tend to be very quiet as they do business. It doesn't get out there. People don't know that these companies are there. They don't know about the kind of jobs that are being provided. So we need transparency about this. We also need to focus a little bit more on education. The governor also talked about education. And we need to educate our citizens. We need to do more cultural programming, for example, to understand Asia in general. I mean, I will tell you, I remember speaking to the staff of a member of Congress, and we were talking about this. And one of the things that she told me is, she said, the difficulty is voters don't make distinctions between countries in East Asia, in Ohio. They don't know that China and Japan and Korea are three different places with very different histories. And I know this is a little disturbing to hear, but we need that sort of basic level of education that, Nippon Steel is not a Chinese steel company. And of course, some of the recent reports that have come out have confused that a little bit. But it is clearly not that. So we need that kind of education. Exchange programs. We need more Japanese students. I was just looking at numbers on Japanese student exchanges. And virtually all Japanese students who come to the United States to study, they go to California or they go to Massachusetts or New York. They never get beyond the coasts. And we need that because that's educational in itself. And we need these exchange programs going back and forth. That's, I think, how we can address these challenges. This is all very, very important. FDI is important both to Japan and to the United States and to the relationship. It's important to trade, supply chain resilience, economic security, all these things that we're talking about. So, I think we need to get a little bit more active in these areas. Thank you.
Paul, thank you for your comments there. I guess I'm just going to ask a few questions. They might be directed towards one particular person, but frankly, feel free to jump in at any time. I'd like to start off with the first question with Miura-san. In terms of, we heard from the governor today, U.S. states have an important part to play in the U.S.-Japan economic relationship. And I think increasingly, it's recognized that Japanese firms will have to take a more regional and state approach towards by Japanese firms. And so I guess, what is JETRO's role in this area? And actually, to build off of also what Paul said earlier in terms of the need for greater outreach, in terms of both regional and state approaches, but also the public outreach approach, what can JETRO do? Or what is JETRO doing?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Yes, I agree with you that for example, the incentives for investment or those subsidies or any measures like something like that, or tax code. So those things are largely the purview of the state government. So it is very important to strengthen relationships with them. So therefore, since around 2017, JITRO has intensified its activities aimed at strengthening relations with the governors and economic development organizations of each state. So through individual meetings or roundtable discussions, JITRO has been conveyed the Japanese company's contribution to the local economy. So such as the number of job creation to state governments. In this way, JITRO strives to create an investment-friendly business environment for Japanese companies. Besides such discussions, JITRO dispatches investment missions for Japanese governments to support investment in the U.S. The JITRO dispatches investment missions for Japanese companies that focus on specific states and industries, working together with the state governments to support investment in the U.S. For example, a mission specializing in semiconductors was conducted with the state of New York in fiscal year 2023. In terms of public relations, we are aware of that importance as well. So JITRO is trying to build our web page or the general webinars, and so everything available for as many people as possible. Given the nature of the JITRO's mission, which is to promote trade and investment, so I think that in many cases, our audiences are business people. We are more a B2B organization rather than B2C organization. But if you're interested in our web pages or YouTubes are open to everyone, and we are trying to make it user-friendly as possible. And also there are nice brochures, so easy to read, easy to look at, so nice charts and graphs and so on. So everyone is always welcome to drop by JITRO, and so we are always happy to share information with them. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, great. If I may ask a quick follow-up, I mean, so having been someone who has studied JITRO very much over my time, what's always struck me was JITRO's presence in the U.S., across the U.S., right, with offices in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, LA, San Francisco. What roles do these more regional offices play in sort of these larger missions that you're trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so JITRO has six offices throughout the U.S., and each office work together with state governments they cover. So the principle of division of labor is geographical. So for example, my office in New York covers around 15 states of the northeastern corner. And we have one in Atlanta, one in Chicago, one in Houston, and two offices along the California. So each office covers its own geographical areas. So which means each office is responsible for communicating with the state governments or municipal governments, which are located in those regions.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. Anita, if you don't mind, I'll ask you the next question. This is really more about worker training. This is my own personal pet topic, but from shipbuilding to semiconductors, many firms in the United States cite the lack of sufficiently trained and skilled workers as a major bottleneck in both defense and civilian manufacturing, and certainly we talked about this in the previous panel on economic security. Do JAMA members face similar challenges, and what steps are they taking to address these labor and skill shortages, and how might that benefit the United States as a whole in the process?
Thank you for the question. It's an important one. So first of all, our members are major job creators across the U.S. As I mentioned, they directly support thousands of substantive careers and befitting a 21st century workforce. And as noted in my remarks earlier, these investments also support millions of other jobs again, the dealer, supplier, and supporting jobs. And I can't talk enough about this record high investment of $61.6 billion in cumulative manufacturing investment in 2023. And that's something I'll mention in because this was reached as Japanese brand automakers continue to expand, retool, and modernize these facilities. So the industry is constantly evolving, so are JAMA member companies in the US. But with that said, members' US operations face many of the same challenges that you've mentioned. So they continue to work with state and local governments and industry partners to address these challenges. And as far as what JAMA member companies in the US do on their own, generally speaking, they take a long-term approach when it comes to developing the US workforce. So, for example, in an effort to create those workforce pipelines, these automakers, they engage, for example, children and young adults by supporting education and learning programs. So in this way, Japanese brand automakers are investing in the future of the US workforce and readying communities through these programs. And that's regardless, actually, of whether those that are participating in those programs, if they go on to actually work at one of these the Japanese brand automakers. But it's also helps them really to inspire them to join the field of advanced manufacturing and really be prepared for the jobs of tomorrow. I have all sorts of examples of workforce development, and that's where that true partnership with the communities are there. For example, there's a public-private partnership between Nissan and the state of Tennessee. This is the Tennessee College of Applied Technology at Murfreesboro's Smyrna campus and Nissan Training Center that opened in 2017. And another example is a long-running industry-leading training program, which is called Toyota's Technician Training and Education Network, also T10. So it's a partnership between Toyota community colleges, vocational schools, and Toyota and Lexus dealerships. So, list goes on, but there's Subaru, as mentioned before, with the partnership team, they offer joint education programs near its manufacturing facility in partnership with local universities. So it allows students to work at the facility while also earning a degree, and often sponsored actually by Subaru. So, and one final note, and this really comes back to the idea of inspiring the next generation. And on a personal note, actually, my office, the JAMA USA team, we had a chance to travel to Ohio to not only tour Honda's first automotive plant in the US in Marysville, but we also had the chance to see how they work with the community. So we visited the Center of Science and Industry in Columbus, Ohio, so COSI. It's a really fun museum. This particular exhibit is called the Meet the Innovators exhibit, and this is sponsored by Honda, where children can explore STEM and STEAM careers. And when we walked through there, you could see there were actually little biographies, and it really brought to life the stories of the engineers that work throughout the facilities, what they do, and in simple terms, and very interactive. And as we were there, the museum was open. The children were engaged, but importantly, parents were engaged. So those are both part of the equation there too, so.
That's what, and certainly I went to COSI a lot during my time in Columbus, so I can vouch for that. That is a terrific museum. That is definitely maybe not worth a trip to Columbus by itself, but maybe a tour of the Honda factory is also get turned into a fun weekend, I'm sure. Okay, Paul. I guess I'm going to throw you the next question. Speaking of workers. What is the view of industrial workers, especially in Ohio, towards foreign investments, particularly from those from Japan, right? So speaking from my own research on the auto industry in the 80s, the UAW was agnostic as to whether or not if an auto plant was a GM plant or a Toyota plant or a Honda plant, as long as their members had jobs. Is this approach still true? And do workers perceive any difference between U.S. and Japanese-owned companies? And I guess, you know, if it's not true, what chance do we have in a very sharply polarized American society?
I'm not sure it's as true anymore.
Okay.
As it once was. I think there is the perception now among at least union leadership, perhaps not so much the rank and file. And one of the things that's really interesting, I think, to look at is maybe the differences between what the rank and file think and what the union leadership thinks, because sometimes that's not exactly the same thing. But at least there's a perception. I mean, there's the Southern strategy now, or whatever, that the auto workers union is taking, right, to try to unionize these plants and in the South, and they see you know, some hostility. I think the fact that a lot of these foreign automakers have located in right-to-work states, you know, states where it's much more difficult for unions to organize, has given the unions themselves some resistance to foreign automakers, and I think that's what's feeding into some of the animosity now between the steel workers and Nippon Steel, is this sort of suspicion about foreign companies and how they look upon unions. So I think this is, you know, this is definitely in play. But, you know, to go to your last point about the partisan politics and whether we can do anything kind of to overcome this, I mean, I think we can. And you know, we're already seeing it in the part of Ohio that I live in now, with a lot more foreign direct investment coming in and people starting to recognize it. And you're seeing other things sort of develop around that, some partnerships between the universities and these companies. So, you know, workers want jobs, right? And they don't always care, you know, where those jobs come from, with the exception that they don't want them to come from China. You know, there clearly is that political angle to it now. But as long as it's not China, I think workers are happy with it. But again, to go back to my original point, we just need to make them kind of more aware of it and what's going on, because even up in Northeast Ohio, where we're seeing this now, people aren't, I think, completely perceiving the change and what's going on. But I think the politics are going to change too, as you're seeing, because, you know, you have the supply chains that go along with these places. And with these supply chains, you're bringing in more people into the area. People from different parts of the country, people from different parts of the world are coming in. In fact, there's a real effort in the local chambers of commerce. They call it, you know, repopulation, because these areas have lost population over the years, and they're trying to bring them back in again, making it more friendly for people, both internationally and domestically, to come to these areas and work for these companies, oftentimes that are foreign companies. They're, for the most part, not US companies. Almost all the growth in jobs in Northeast Ohio is the result of foreign direct investment, not domestic companies coming in. And so, you know, I think you're starting to see that. So you have a message, you just have to deliver it.
Fair enough.
Can I just jump in? Sorry.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, on that message, I think it's also important who delivers the message. Just another, on a personal note, another trip we took out, it was to Subaru of Indiana. And in hearing from the person who runs the training, he mentioned that he did not have a college degree, but he said through the opportunities that has been provided, he's pretty close to retirement and it's going to be comfortable. And it was a real, when you received that, you could tell there was a lot of pride and there was a lot of peace for the road ahead. So I think who delivers that message, it really can determine how it can resonate.
We'd love to talk to you more about that. But my final question before I throw it to the audience, this is the elephant in the room. We have to talk about this, but primarily for Miyoda-san and Anita, you know, for Nippon Steel, for the Nippon Steel offer for U.S. Steel and the political response that we've seen in the United States, how are you communicating these developments with your members? How might it impact their views on the U.S. as an investment destination? And in Anita's case, I mean, certainly John Bozzella, the president of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, came out very strongly against blocking the deal. How does that also shape the thinking of your members as well?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. So First of all, JETRO is not in a position to comment on the investments of individual companies. But in general, what I hope is perhaps I would like to echo the points made during today's seminar by many speakers starting from the Governor Holcomb. So I think the thing I hope is that the people of the U.S. Further understand the contribution made by Japanese companies' investments to the U.S. economy, such as job creation and so on. So that's what I hope, and perhaps that would be get in line with your earlier message, comment you made. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
So, like everyone else, we're really taking note of how this is all going to play out. And you mentioned another organization, but from our perspectives as an organization representing Japan-based automakers, there's clearly a lot of domestic politics at play, especially this year. I think Paul went into thorough detail about that. Notably, this issue has garnered bipartisan criticism. With that said, the current administration has publicly welcomed and has been committed to open investment. And broadly speaking, FDI remains largely positive. It's a good thing. And typically, it's something that does not implicate the sharing of sensitive technologies with adversarial governments or involve national security issues. So we should continue to amplify the significant investments from Japan made here in the US and the close ties that exist between the two countries and endure between the two countries. As for our members, their focus is on the billions of dollars invested in the US with a people-centered and long-term vision for growth.
Great. Well, wonderful. Let's take some questions from the audience. We might have time for maybe 2 or so. And obviously, please identify yourself when you ask a question. Otherwise, I'm going to be asking more questions. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to ask more questions then. I guess, let's see. Okay, any questions? Anyone? Riley?
Hi, Riley Walters, senior fellow here. Thank you all. This has been a wonderful conversation. Obviously, I think there's a lot of discussion around how politics intersects with true economics, and I think much of this discussion, I think, has highlighted the benefits of both foreign direct investment, how it benefits the economy, and how, in a way that actually, I think, helps politics as well. It certainly helps at least bridge some of the geopolitics as well. My question is, obviously, the Prime Minister is visiting next week, and I think one of the messages he'll be delivering is the strong connection between the United States and Japan, both politically, militarily, security, and economics. And so maybe, if you'll indulge me, what are some of the things you'd perhaps like him to actually talk about as he delivers his message of this continuing partnership? Thank you.
Starting with you? Okay.
Anyone can take this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. It's I certainly welcome the state visit of the Prime Minister next week, and this is a great opportunity. And I look forward to what will happen in that meetings. And I think from JETRO's viewpoint, I think I don't have any specific thing or line that I would like to see from Kishida-san, but I can surely say that the bilateral economic relationships between two countries is very good right now. So we see a good amount of investment from Japan to this country, as mentioned, and there is a good appetite of the Japanese business communities to come here. So if you ask, according to the JETRO survey, we asked the Japanese companies which country is going to be the next destination for your overseas investment. So the US is the #1 right now. So there's a very good atmosphere in the business circle between Japan and the US. And we would like to, so JETRO would like to see that continue. And I understand the behind that good atmosphere, there is a political or a diplomatic good relationships between two countries. So, so economic partnership is on the foundation of political stability and good relationships. And so I look forward to see this state visit be good opportunities to further continue that type of atmosphere.
Anyone else, or?
Oh, well, I think it's also, I've been talking a lot about growing investment. I think to underscore that, and then also to underscore the numbers are important, but this is, as I mentioned, good quality FDI and what that means. And part of that is also bolstering U.S. economic competitiveness as well. So.
I just think, to add to that quality, climate may be something that also would be emphasized. I mean, a lot of, Japanese companies are very concerned with climate change and are very environmentally friendly. And it's that kind of technology that they're able to bring to the United States. So this may be some way of sort of bridging some political difficulties to emphasize that role of sort of climate innovation from Japanese companies and being part of foreign direct investment.
Yeah, and certainly that's an argument that Nippon Steel has made in their own pitch to buy U.S. steel. Let's take one final question from the gentleman right here.
Thank you. My name is Kenneth Marubeni Corporation. Thank you, Mira-san, for mentioning our investment in Indianapolis. So I guess this question is might be too difficult to Mira-san, but I would like to ask the rest of the two panels. So if you have been U.S. representatives of Nippon Steel, what has been your advice to them before they announced the deal?
Can you repeat that?
Just to clarify, I guess, is it to go back in time and to give advice to Nippon Steel before they?
Before the announcement of this deal, so what would be your advice to Nippon Steel to get this deal done more smoothly?
Right. In addition to playing the lottery first, but yes, yes, 1.3 billion I think right now. Anyway, if anyone would like to take this,
I mean, perhaps more of an outreach to the steel workers ahead of time, because that's become one of the major hitches in this, and the steel workers have been quite explicit about this, that they wanted to be consulted more before this process went forward. So, being more transparent about their intentions, I think, with the steel workers and forming that foundation first might have been, a way of smoothing things out a little bit.
Yeah, I can't underscore more how much community outreach is important. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's an important, it's a key thing to do when you enter into a market. You have to know who will potentially work for you. You have to know who will be your neighbor. So, outreach.
if you want to take this.
Well, I guess. Well, I don't have any specific advice or something like that. It's, but I just hope the making sure having a necessary communication with the key stakeholders is a very important thing, whatever the company is. And so it's for general advice, make sure who is interested in what and who is concerned about what, and perhaps outreaching to those people as much as possible is a very key thing for successful investment.
Well, thank you all again for staying on for this last panel on Japanese FDI. As I think we have seen from today's program, the U.S.-Japan relationship remains strong. Economics is a major portion of it, and I hope we can continue to find better ways to build a stronger future together in terms of U.S.-Japan relations writ large. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for sharing their time and their thoughts. And thank you all for sharing your time with us here on Friday. Thank you.